George, it's an absolute pleasure and delight to be here today and speak with you as one of Canada's special people in student affairs and services, and be a formal part of Caucus's special project, which will be viewed by many in the country at Halifax this year in 1997. Our affiliation goes back 25 some odd years, and you've always been a tremendous mentor to me, and admire you like many others across the country. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today for this special occasion.
Well, thank you very much, David. That's very kind of you. And may I immediately congratulate you on your new appointment. I don't know if I'm breaking the news to all of those people in Halifax, but Laurier's gain is, of course, Windsor's loss, and I wish you and Marianne a very, very successful career at Sir Wilfrid Laurier.
Thanks very much, George. Can you tell us a little bit about, we'll start with your career in student affairs and services and the positions that you held and the number of years, and take us through the historical venue a little bit.
My heavens. Well, I started at the University of Windsor in '63 after teaching in the high school system for 6 years. And it was in academic administration from '63 to 1967, assisting the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Science and also teaching in the history department. I taught 3 courses my 1 year, all for the grand total of $8,000. That was my salary. The Bazillions drove a hard bargain in those days. And then suddenly, and quite surprisingly, in 1967, Dr. DeMarco, who was the vice president of the university at that time, asked me to go play golf with him at Essex, that beautiful golf course, and I didn't know what the devil it was all about, and I was quite nervous. As a matter of fact, as I've said before, I think I set a new course record of 158 strokes to go around the course. And then we had dinner together, and he said, I'd like you to be the Dean of Students at the University of Windsor. And to show my naivety or my ignorance, I said, what is a Dean of Students? I don't know. And so that's what happened. I started then in Student Services in '67 and was Dean of Students until 1980, and then became Assistant Vice President of Student Services from '80 to '84, when, of course, you'll remember that we took on additional responsibilities, the food service operation in the University Center, which I remember I just farmed off to you. And then I left Student Services in '84 to take on the alumni operation. So really I've been out of Student Services for now 13 years. But it was always, I think, the highlight of my career at the University of Windsor, especially those golden ages, and when one was a Dean of Students. It was a marvelous opportunity and got me to know all the students on campus really well, especially the resident students. And I remember when I appointed you as Director of Residence, and the same Dr. DeMarco wanted to know who the hell was Dave McMurray, because you were still an undergraduate at that time. Yeah. But we took a chance to look at your career and how that has gone. So that's kind of briefly what happened to me here at Windsor.
How did student services evolve, and what changes do you recall? Really from the early to mid '60s through the '70s and into the '80s, you really were a part of student affairs and services for parts of 3 decades.
Yes, yeah, an interesting period of my life too. I went to the first COPS conference, which the association was then known as the Canadian Association of University and Personnel Services, COPS, in '68 after my appointment, and was really taken, and that was in University of Calgary, the first time I'd gone to Calgary. And that was really an eye-opener for me, because I met some just marvelous people at that conference who eventually became really lifelong friends of mine. And got involved in the association and became president of the Canadian Student Affairs Association in '72, '73.
You were the first president of Caucus, were you not?
I was first president of Caucus, yes. And that was the next year. And the great debate about that was in reference to placement officers. I'm not only referring to the federal government employees that operated manpower operations on campuses, and I would imagine 60, maybe even 70% of the universities had Canada Manpower, including Windsor, as you'd call. And but also included vice presidents of organizations that came to student service meetings. And I think the straw that broke the camel's back about that problem was corporate president became the president of cops, and there was great unrest among the student service university people about is this the right vehicle that we want as a professional organization. And that's how CACUS was formed in 73, 74, and I was the first president. And we simply kind of kicked out the placement people. And they
That's a nice way of putting it. Yeah.
And they formed their own organization. I think it was a benefit to both placement people, and I think that became the University Canadian Placement Association, something like that. And CACUS was formed. We had trouble about the name, if I may tell that story.
Oh, absolutely.
Because CACUS is a Canadian Association of College and University Student Services, and of course it's CACUS, as we all know, and going marvelously well even as we speak. There is some debate among university circles about whether it should be university and colleges or colleges and universities. And we thought that if you pronounce the word, if you put university services before college services, the pronunciation is not appropriate. So that's why Canadian Association of Colleges and University Student Services came into being. And we were busy in that formative year about doing bylaws and constitution and getting the organization going across Canada. And even dealing in that time, to get it a long way around to answer your question, establish an institute for the training of new people coming into the organization. I think all of my colleagues in the early 60s and certainly into the 70s came into student services by other avenues. Mine is a typical example. You know, what is a dean of students? And whereas now, as I assume, and this is 12 years away from the organization, it's much more professionally trained. And I think we were even back in 74 thinking of an institute for professional training. You asked how things have changed, and as I reflect, I remember one of the first conferences I went to, and I mean no disrespect in any of these comments, as anecdotal things that suddenly comes to my mind, but it was at Dalhousie, and I was sitting there with Ron Eit, who of course was the Warden of Residence and had just retired, a very, very dear friend of mine, and Magnus Flynn, who was the Dean of Students at Sir George Williams at that time, it was known, later to become known as Concordia. And we went to this meeting on residence life and the benefits of living in residence. And the panel was really Dean of Women, and we were sitting there, and the whole topic was about personal hygiene and tea and white gloves and proper etiquette for ladies and that type of thing, you know. And Ron Eit, I think, just became very frustrated and got up and he said, there's more to living in residence than what we're hearing right now. And he was immediately attacked by this Greek chorus. And one lady said, well, who are you? And he said, well, I'm Dr. Ron Eit, and I'm the Warden of Residence at the University of Waterloo. And the reaction was kind of, the other looked at him and said, and you were out drinking there.
Oh, my God.
Oh, my God. And, of course, Waterloo, when it was formed, had a drinking policy. You could drink in your own room, you know, and that kind of thing. But that was not looked upon as a very progressive thought by that particular body. So things certainly have changed, certainly in that policy anyways. But I think the experience I've had was getting to know some of these marvelous Canadians across the country and working with the association.
Did you ever find it difficult to explain to your academic colleagues what it was exactly that a dean of students did or student services was all about?
No, I don't think so. Not in my particular case. And I think that's perhaps because, you know, I had been in the academic community 4 years before I got into student services, and I'd been a very active part of the Department of History, and most of the academic people knew who I was. And don't forget, the campus was pretty small at that time, too. 67, we'd have 5,000 students, maybe?
Yeah.
So you got to know all the students, and you certainly knew most of the faculty. So I never experienced, as some of my colleagues did, the secondhand citizenship that I think you're implying in your question. That the important thing is what happens in the classroom. And of course, we've discussed, you and I, and at so many other times, that learning takes place all over the campus.
Absolutely.
And just not in the classroom. Learning takes place in the residence, and learning takes place on the football field, and learning takes place in student government, and learning takes place in all those interactions that are important and part of the student services modus operandi. And I think that was well accepted in Windsor. I never recall having any kind of difficulties with academicians about that.
What do you recall as the major highlights of your career? What touched you as a highlight over the years?
Well, I think the Dean of Students period, when I was so close to students, and particularly in residence. I recall the Dean of Students at that time, of course, the whole, I think, job and position developed as a kind of a disciplinarian. You know, the Dean of Men was the guy that was really the disciplinarian on campus, and I think that's the traditional role in Canadian universities, certainly in the 30s and in the 40s, and it was evolving that way in the 60s. So the Dean of Students had a lot of power, for good or ill. And I recall, may I be anecdotal? Is
Absolutely.
that okay? I remember going to an alumni function when I was responsible for the alumni in Toronto, and this chap came up to me and he said, "George, how are you?" You know, and I said, "Fine." He said, "You don't remember me?" And I did not, you know, and I was searching, and he said, I really would like you to meet my wife." And I was delighted to do that because, you know, and when I first got into the alumni operation, I'd go to a person and again, in my naivety, I would say, you know, "Well, how's the wife?" And the person would say, "Haven't seen her in 4 years."
Oops.
You know, yeah, you know, and I'd say, "Oh, I'm sad to hear that." And the response would be, "Why? I'm not." So this is a new change to meet one's wife. So he dragged me over and introduced me, and he said, "This is the guy that really changed my life around." And he related the story that I had forgotten, but I remembered it as he related it. And I was late 60s, and he was just a guy who was always in trouble, and he was either in residence or in class, and he wasn't going to class, and he was just a pain in the neck. And he was always in my office. He was always being referred to my office. So I said to him, I brought him in, I said, "This is it." I said, you're wasting my time, and you're wasting your parents' money. So I want you off the campus by 5 o'clock. Pack your bags and get out. You're gone. And if you want to come back to school, let me know, and I'll get you back in. But right now, go away. And he did. And he related the story that he suddenly realized, you know, a little bit about values and responsibility, and did come back the next year. And now he's a senior vice president of Bank of Montreal. So that was really hands-on relationship with students. And of course, that changed dramatically. I say, perhaps facetiously sometimes, that I hate the time when a faculty of law came into my quiet campus. Because bylaws changed, and you didn't have that power anymore, and you couldn't do it, and you had to have a committee, and you know about the Student Services Committee, and of course, whatever the misconduct was, you know, you had to have evidence, and the student would arrive with a law student with 17 tomes of book ready to go to the Supreme Court of Canada on appeal, and you went through that process. So that has been a remarkable change on campus. Does that help?
Oh yeah. I recall some of the antics that you were involved with too, in being close with the students, always on the top of the invitation list. Do you recall any activities, fun times with the student council, orientation, dunk tanks, those kinds of fun things that...
You went through all of those things, you know. That was part and parcel of pie fights on the campus. As a matter of fact, Al Strachan, who now writes for the Toronto Stars. He used to be the hockey writer for the Globe and Mail. I think the Toronto Star now. And I heard him on the radio just the other day. He works out of Calgary. He was the editor of the Lance, and he and I got into a great pie fighting contest. And we had basketball games with the student council, and all of that. I worked very, very closely with student council, even during the radical period of the campus when we had the 14-day sit-in in '68.
Happening again these days with tuition increases.
Yes, I noticed that, you know.
Some things change and never stay the same.
I always thought that that's it and made my career, because I was only in the deanship for a year. And of course, there was a lot of anxiety about that, a lot of stress. The students occupied the religious department offices at the university, only at the University of Windsor when they occupied. At Sir George Williams, they occupied the computer center and caused an awful lot of damage. And they destroyed it, $1 million worth of damage, and that had happened. And they had occupied the offices of the University of Toronto, and then of course the American Revolution of free speech was going on, and a lot of articles, you know, with all sorts of F words just to get reaction. And there was a lot of terrible stress going on. Why it made my career is because I predicted to the president exactly when the sit-in would end, you know, and they were all baffled about that. And the president was under a lot of stress about what are you going to do, you know, kick those students out, bring in the police, they're trespassing. And we used to have these meetings, and I would suggest caution, and you know, let's just wait, because they'll be leaving on this Thursday at midnight. And of course, we were negotiating with the students and we were getting terms of an agreement, really in reference to student representation on departmental councils, which the president, Dr. Lady, had already kind of agreed to in principle. But when the magic Thursday came along, the students packed their bags and left. And of course, Slack Week was starting.
Of course.
You know? And you know, traditionally, all the students here leave on Thursday before Slack Week begins, or study week, whichever is the appropriate term. Starts the next week. And I knew that the students would prefer being on the beaches of Florida than in the cold floor of the religious department. So everybody was quite impressed with this prediction, but it seemed pretty obvious to me. But that was a time of great stress and strain, and a lot of pressure on Dr. Leddy. As you know, I'm going through his papers, and I just came across a lot of correspondence with other presidents from him about that incident. Interestingly enough, he doesn't refer to my good advice that I gave him.
Your ability to predict the future.
Credit for solving this problem. So that certainly has been a great change in the office of the Dean of Students in reference to my period. Now, I was at the end when, of course, it became very, very, what's the good word, litigious, I guess, perhaps the best. You know. Another anecdote, can I talk about that?
Absolutely.
Apropos of committees of student affairs, when all the evidence had to be given, and you know, you had to talk about this, and this is at the same time where a number of Hong Kong Chinese ethnic students were coming to Windsor. And I think at one time the enrollment of Chinese, either from Malaysia or Hong Kong, reached about 22% of the student body. And there was some cheating going on where a student would impersonate another student, right, and catch them, you know, to write an exam. And I was in a mathematics course, and the TA, the student, his last name was T.C. Wong, and he was working for Professor Wong in the Department of Mathematics. And the imposter was also named Wong, you know. So I had to go see Professor Wong about the student to see if you know, did you know that this was not the right student, you know. And Ken Long and Ken was my assistant at that time. And we went and saw Dr. Wong. He was just furious about this whole matter, you know. And I had to ask the question, and he looked at me and he said, "You people look alike. Chinese people don't look alike." And of course, you know, the stereotyping of the Chinese students, and the line about 3 Wongs don't make a, you know, I'm not even going to finish that one.
No.
But another, as I just reflect, to show some of the amazing things that went on during that period, was also the story, and you were involved in it. That was the story of the young Chinese student who was registered either by accident or by manipulation in the girls' residence at Laurier Hall.
Yes, absolutely.
And he arrived and he was shunted over to the residence, and androgynous-looking young man. You know. And the tradition was the boys carried the girls' luggage into the new residence. And so he was got into his room, and there he was in the women's residence. And a knock on the door, and a Nigerian girl came in, the roommate. And suddenly they realized what the problem was here.
Something wrong here.
First of all, I got a guy in my room, and I'm in a women's residence. So they carried on this charade that lasted for about 2 or 3 weeks. And they got clothes for, you know, this girl and this guy, and see the confusion. And they had some kind of a social in the residence, and the chap was invited, and he said he couldn't go because he didn't have any clothes. Well, that's a challenge to good Canadian girls, so they provided him with clothes and high heels.
You can fix that.
They'll fix that one up. And so he went teetering on his high heels to this social, and finally the head resident came to see me. He said, "I think we have a problem." And I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "I think I have a guy in the residence, and he's been there for 3 weeks." And so we had to kind of sneak him out at the end of the night. One night, and moved him over to another residence. But it was a crazy 3 weeks of what was going on. And you can understand the concerns of the two. And it turned out that the girl would make sure there was no one in the washroom so he could have a shower, and then he went back in the room. It was crazy. But I don't think those kind of comical things happen anymore. It was a great time to be in student service.
Student services people always talk about the personal side of their career, and I get the biggest kick out of meeting people from across the country, and when you mention something in terms of student services, a huge smile comes to their face. How did student services affect you and influence you personally?
Well, I think it certainly made me grow a lot into the whole dynamics of the interrelation between an administrator and students in that 60s and 70s. It made me open to a lot of things that I might not have been open to if I had been simply an academician working in the Department of History. You know, I got involved in a lot of things that perhaps I would have been opposed to, but I got to understand the other point of view very well. And we'd have these meetings with students, and the DH was a favorite spot where, well, you recall those days. You know, I
solved the world's problems at the DH.
One time I thought it was a race between liver failure and retirement. You know, and sitting and talking and drinking, and I think it certainly opened my life very much. I remember becoming a great defender of student issues, you know, with the senior administration, and where people just could not understand what was going on. When the Lance was, you know, the president tried to fire the editor of the Lance at one time, and I said, "No, you can't do that. It's just not worth it, you know." Get Canadian press on us, you know, freedom of the press, and those kind of issues, which really not apparently that serious to students anymore, and I've seen, you know, the change in students, and you know it much more than I do now. And students, pardon me, students on residence, certainly we're a collegial group, and mass exodus to Tiger Stadium for the opener, and the leagues of hockey that they played. Now I see a lot of insularity with students, and you know, I don't want to be bothered with the rest of the world. I just have to get ready to get a job, and that's kind of sad to see. The 60s and 70s were really a golden age of students and student activity, and I was very privileged to be part of it.
Do you think the whole career opportunity situation between the 70s and late 80s, 90s has had a lot to do with student culture? 10 jobs for every student in the 70s perhaps, and now 10 students for every job?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think there's any doubt about it. I really kind of feel sorry for kids now, graduating, and the job problems, which were not there in the 60s.
No.
I mean, the job opportunities were just so open and so attractive that no one even talked about it.
Very competitive and
now
stressful.
It's very competitive and very stressful. And I think you were telling me about the computer age and the
technology's effect on student life.
So it certainly has changed.
There's a number of new professionals in student affairs and services entering the field all of the time, and the Canadian Institute on Student Affairs and Services is a wonderful program to try and provide some professional development for those people. You've had so many years of experience. How would you advise a new professional entering the field in student services now? What would you tell them to look out for, to be mindful of in terms of their career?
I think if I had some advice to give to a new professional, I would probably say get involved with students. Don't look upon that whole kind of process as an academic process, but certainly professional training is needed. I have no quarrel with that. As I indicated, even in the 60s, we were thinking of professional training for people coming into the profession. But you've got to get out and get your feet dirty with students. I mean, you've got to get to know them, and you have to get to know their interests and their concerns and what's bothering them. And you're not going to do that by reading learned theses in the library. And I say that without any criticism about the professional development, but I think it's imperative that we do that. You know, our hockey games that we played with Cody Hall, the Student Services, and the Challenge Cup for years was just a little reflection of that, you know, and then having a party afterwards in Cody Hall. And that I think is essential. I remember Doug Eaton, another very, very good friend of mine from the Memorial, as he always said, now retired, and I were asked to do an external review of the University of Alberta Student Services Program. This would be about 1983, I think, just before I went to the alumni operation. And he and I sat, and Ray Ryan, who was a retired dean of students at the University of Alberta, was also on the committee. And we sat and received briefs from student council and the Indian office and all of these kind of briefs, and from student council about what they would like to see student services changed, and what we would admit. Well, Doug and I had a long day, and we had dinner, and then we said, well, let's really find out what's going on. So he and I went to the pub, and we sat in the student pub and started talking to students. And then we were invited to what would be equivalent to what we would have, a resident assistant, one of the students, a graduate student who was in charge of a floor or something, you know, up to his room until 4 o'clock in the morning, you know. And we learned what was going on at the University of Alberta. And made the report the next day to the president. The president wasn't too pleased with us and didn't invite us back, but that's another story. That's Eden's problem. He did that. And but we learned so much about the University of Alberta and just talking to students. And so that's what a young professional, I would think, would have to do.
the whole involvement concept.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There's a trust that has to develop, and that's a two-way street. I mean, you have to, at least in my experience, you have to indicate and prove that you are going to be trusted. Then, you know, you're not suddenly going to run to the cops. And although sometimes I was tempted, but and that is what I would suggest a professional is going to have to do.
Perhaps a common question for new professionals entering the field: how would you like to be remembered 25 years from now? You touched so many students and people in your over 3 decades of service. How do you think folks out there remember Dean of Students George McMahon?
I would hope that they remember they owe me about 17,000 drafts of beer. That's a good question, David. I never even thought about that. I think I would like to be remembered as one who was trusted and honorable and helpful and conscientious and in that area. And I think I've got that reflection, you know, and as my story about the alumnus that came up about his career. And I'm very pleased, you know, when I took early retirement and the retirement party that I had and the breakfast dinner in Toronto. That was kind of the reaction of a lot of people, you know, that certainly in the alumni after the fact that they got a little bit more interested in their alma mater than they had before, and that they saw George McMahon as that kind of a person. I think that's how I would like to be remembered.
I think thousands could confirm that, and I, for one, certainly can, that you were always regarded as someone you could rely on to help, and viewed by many, particularly in the residence area, as a second father for those away from home. And I know that you've had good practice at that, but
yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
With 11 children.
Yeah, 11 children bought and paid for. And incidentally, for the record, 7 of them are university graduates from Windsor, and I have 2 daughter-in-laws that are graduates of the university. And our youngest son will be graduating next spring, so that would make 8 of the 11 who are university graduates. But as my wife always used to say, we were smart enough to have a plumber and an electrician.
That's good planning.
So they're invaluable. I certainly think that helped, you know, in my relationship with students, that the fact that I did have such a family, and I looked upon them as really like sons and daughters, and we can name lists, and you know, certainly in the residence, the number of people that we got really close to, and now are really good friends of mine, and that was reflected by their attendance at the retirement party or in Toronto, and I think that's just a marvelous experience that I've had.
We're all headed to Halifax for '97, and I'm sure you can recall some good times at caucus conferences. Is there anything you'd like to say to all the delegates of caucus '97?
Well, I think the great experience I had, and I don't think I can match Ron Eit's record. He claims that he's been at every Canadian university, except the University of Regina, which kind of bothers him that he wants to set that record, you know. I don't think I've visited every university, but I bet 90% of the universities I've visited. And the friends I've had, you know, and met, and the very good times we always had at a caucus meeting, from Doug Eaton and Memorial to right across the country, which is a great experience for me. The fact that, you know, think that I can pick up the phone and call anybody in Canada. It has been very edifying. So that, I think, is really the essential part. Caucus was not only a great learning experience, but also a fun time, certainly in my period. And when I went into the alumni operation in '84, I had no interest in getting involved in the Canadian Alumni Association. And I sent one of the staff members because I just didn't want to do it. CACUS was such a great experience for me, and the friends that I met, you know, Pierre Boulez, our good friend.
Hard to replace.
Oh yes, and that relationship was just, you know, Pierre Boulez, remember?
Oh yeah, yeah.
You
From
guys
University
from
of Ottawa.
Yeah, so you guys from Windsor, you always get the women. I don't know. And of course, he was free to you and to.
No, I never heard that.
Yeah. But you know, those are just magical moments, and I cherish that very, very much. And we always had, as I said, a great time. The other thing that we organized too, that I was responsible for, was OXA, getting that started. That is the Ontario Committee of Student Affairs, where we would meet with the deans of students, or whatever the appropriate position was at various universities, like the warden of residence. I love that term. It's so typical Canadian.
I think he was the only one. There was only one warden, was there not?
Yes, there was only one warden. Yeah. And we pooled our money, so everybody had to put money into a travel pool, so that the people from Laurentian could come, and then everybody got paid at the end of for their costs. It meant that York and Ryerson and Toronto, because we always met at Ryerson. I don't know if he's still doing that.
Yeah,
Is that
that's actually 2 weeks ago.
Oh, well, you know, that still is going on. And you still have the travel budget and pooling of the money.
Yes.
And so that representatives from the Lakehead and from Laurentian could come, because budgets, even in those days, were tight. And that was great fun, you know. The meeting with
John Becker shared a story a couple of weeks ago about, I think you were the treasurer at the time, and a meeting at Barbarian Steakhouse, and a gentleman from Lakehead showing up a little later after you'd perhaps gone over your limit with your Visa card.
Yeah, his name was John Kerr, and we had counted, since John had not been there. We knew that we had another $250 in the pot, and so that we decided to have a very good dinner. And right in the middle of dinner, in came John Kerr, you know, and I thought, oh God, he just cost us $250. Yeah, Becker. There's another story too, and that was Becker really was the treasurer, not myself. I was smart enough to stay away from those kind of jobs. But we went out for dinner, and he didn't have enough money, or he forgot his credit card or whatever it was. So I gave him my credit card, and it was a substantial bill, because we lived well in those days. You know? And it was about $600 or something. It was 14 people. And I got home, and I have a habit of emptying all my stuff on a dresser, and there was this bill that Elaine, Lord Lover, found, and all I heard was this scream, you know, you spent what?
What kind of a meeting was
it? The check is coming, the check is in the mail. You know, those are really very great times. And Les Prince, who you got to know.
Yes,
Les Prince, I think, was the dean of students that everybody wanted to emulate at McMaster, and he took over from Ivor Wynne, where the stadium is named after Ivor. And Les was just a marvelous man, and getting to know him and getting to hear what he had to do, and quite frankly, trying to emulate what he was doing at McMaster. And remember, he used to come every summer and go to a Tiger ball game, and with Boston, he always wanted to see Boston, and we always put him up in residence and buy a bottle of rye for him and everything.
And Rudy Heinzel followed that tradition.
Was that right, eh?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So it was, and I think you have experienced that with CACUS, with the younger generation, Johnson and Memorial that took Eaton's place, and Jim Griffin now out where, UBC?
University of Victoria.
Victoria,
yeah.
Okay, was it Prince Edward Island? We used to have the golf tournament all the time when we got together. A little trophy, the trophy we carried around every year. That was really a marvelous time. The '84 National Convention. Remember the CACUS convention in '84 that we hosted?
How could I forget?
Yes, that was my last act really in CACUS, because I went on to the alumni, and just shortly thereafter we had it that summertime. And Georges Allard from the University of Sherbrooke, who became a CACUS president, and we ran a program for the Francophones coming down. about the French fact in Essex County,
Yeah,
and
to
took
the
them on a
surprise
tour.
of many,
To
actually.
the surprise, absolutely, the astonishment. The people didn't know that the French civilization here had lasted, from the 1700s.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was a great conference. That
Yeah.
was a marvelous time. The Boblo boat trip.
What a celebrative way to finish a career.
Yeah, looking
through
back at
services.
it, yes,
was really
it
a
was.
highlight.
Yep. And I think certainly one of the most successful conferences of all time for CACUS. I think people still talk about it.
I think so. George, it was tremendous camaraderie in your days, and that continues today.
I'm glad to hear that.
And on behalf of everyone, want to thank you for all of your pioneer efforts in starting off CACUS and the profession itself. A lot of people are truly indebted to experts like yourself with personality as well. Thanks very much,
George. On-the-job training.
On-the-job
that's what it
training.
is. And to those in Halifax, have a good time.
All right.